There are posts you stand and you feel nothing but your feet on the stone and the cold moving through your tunic and the long, indifferent passage of time. And then there are posts you stand and you feel everything, every year of it, every mile, every word you never said, and you hold it all behind a face that the world reads as stone. The night they brought David O'Rell's casket into the chapel of Aldenmere, I was assigned the second watch. 4 hours. Midnight to 4. The chapel holds 40, maybe 50 people on a good day, with the pews cleared out and the regimental banners hung from the vaulting. That night it held no one but me, a single cadet posted at the rear door, and a box of dark-stained mahogany draped in the household colors. I had known about Davin for 4 years. I had known it the moment Sergeant Aldous Penrose found me at the eastern gate at 6 in the morning and said his name in the flat, careful way you say a name when the man it belongs to is already gone. I had nodded. I had returned to my post. I had stood for the remaining 5 hours of my watch and I had not moved. That was 4 years ago, and in that time I had not spoken about it to anyone, because there was nothing useful to say and because the regiment does not ask you to. It asks you to stand. It asks you to be the thing that does not move when everything else does. I had been doing that for 11 years, and I was reasonably good at it. What I was less good at was standing in the dark of the chapel and pretending that the man in the box was a stranger to me. The candles were set in iron stands at the 4 corners of the catafalque, tall ivory candles, thick as a man's wrist, throwing a warm and unsteady light that made the household emblem on the draping look almost alive. The chapel smelled of old stone and beeswax and something beneath those things, something cold and formal, the smell of an institution performing its final duty toward one of its own. I stood at the foot of the casket, rifle at my right side, chin level, eyes front, and I listened to the candles. Candlelight is not silent. You stand still enough, long enough, you hear it, a faint, papery sound, a hiss at the wick, a breath of air making the flame lean one way and then right itself. It is the only thing in a vigil that moves. Everything else, the stone, the banners, the box, the men inside it, is finished moving. The banners overhead were the regiment's old colors, faded to a deep burgundy and gold. They had been hung for the occasion by the household chamberlain's staff sometime in the late afternoon, before the casket arrived, and they hung perfectly straight and perfectly still in the windless chapel air. Regimental banners do not move the way flags move in the open. They simply hang, heavy and declarative, as if they were made not to fly but to bear witness. Looking up at them in the small hours of that morning, I thought there was something honest in that. A flag that flies is performing. A banner that hangs is simply present. I understood that distinction, in my body if not in words. David O'Rell had been 29 years old when he shipped out. I had been at the eastern gate that morning because it was my post, the same way it was always my post at 7 in the morning on a Tuesday. The regiment was marching through for transport to the staging point, and that was a Tuesday, and so I was there, and so was he. He was in the middle of the column. Not at the front, not at the rear. The middle, where the privates and the junior corporals go when nobody has given them a reason yet to be anywhere special. He was wearing full kit, same as the others. He had his rifle across his body and his pack on his back and his face set the way we all set our faces when we are going somewhere that frightens us and we do not want the men beside us to know. But I had known David O'Rell for 6 years by then. I knew what his face looked like when he was frightened. He caught my eye as he passed through. Just for a second, the way you catch someone's eye across a room at a party when you want them to know you saw them, and then you look away and the moment closes. He looked at me. I was at attention. I am always at attention. And then he was past me and the column kept moving and the sound of boots on cobblestone filled the gateway and I stood and listened to it diminish. I could not break protocol to call after him. I could not step out of position to clasp his arm, or say the things you say when you don't know if you're going to see a man again. The post doesn't allow for that. The post is exactly as it appears to be, a man, a position, a uniform, a rifle, and the understanding that none of those things belong to him personally right now. They belong to something larger. You give yourself to that, and in return it gives you something back, something you can't quite name, a framework, a reason, a shape to put around a life that might otherwise sprawl. So I stood. And he passed. And that was the last I saw of him alive. The cadet at the rear of the chapel shifted his weight somewhere around 1:30. I heard it, the small creak of a boot sole on the stone, the adjustment of a young man who has not yet learned to be entirely still. He was perhaps 19. He had been assigned the door watch, which meant he had to stand the same 4 hours I did, and he had less practice at it. I did not blame him for that. You learn stillness the same way you learn anything, slowly, and with a great deal of failure first. He had been watching me since midnight. Not the way you watch someone when you expect them to do something interesting, more the way a young soldier watches a senior man when he's trying to understand something he cannot quite articulate. There is a question in that kind of watching. I recognized it because I had been that cadet once, a long time ago, assigned to a door I didn't understand in a place I'd barely earned the right to stand in, watching an older guardsman at a post and trying to figure out what I was looking at. The answer, when I finally understood it, was simple. I was looking at someone who had decided. Decided what, you might ask? Decided everything. Decided that the post mattered more than the comfort of shifting his weight. Decided that the men in the box deserved 4 hours of something immovable. Decided that the uniform was not a costume but a contract, and that the contract was with the dead as much as with the living. I had made that decision 11 years ago. Tonight, standing over David O'Rell, I was being asked to hold it in conditions I had not anticipated, which is to say, in conditions of grief. Grief is not an excuse the regiment recognizes, and I do not offer it as one. But I want you to understand what it costs, some nights, to be the thing that does not move. It costs you the luxury of letting your face do what it wants to do. It costs you the small physical release of a breath held too long, finally let go. It costs you the gesture, the thing your body knows to do in the presence of the dead, the instinct that reaches back to something older than any regiment, older than any protocol, the impulse to touch, to acknowledge, to say with your hand what your voice cannot say in this place. I held all of that at bay for 3 hours and 40 minutes. At 20 minutes to 4, 20 minutes before my relief was due, 20 minutes before this watch was over and David O'Rell would become someone else's responsibility for another 4 hours, I did something that is not in any drill manual I have ever read. I stepped forward. 1 pace. A single, deliberate step, bringing me from the foot of the catafalque to the side of it, so that I was standing level with the midpoint of the casket. I brought my right arm across my body in a motion that was not a salute goes up, palm out, crisp and public. This was nothing like that. I reached out, and I rested my right hand, white glove flat, on the lid of the casket. Just the hand. Palm down. Still. I held it there for 3 seconds. I counted them, not because 3 is a significant number in any manual, but because I needed a number, and 3 felt like the right amount of time to say what I was saying without making it a performance. Then I brought my hand back to my side, stepped back 1 pace, and returned to attention. The cadet at the rear of the chapel had gone very still. I finished the remaining 19 minutes of my watch in the same posture I had maintained for the first 3 hours and 41 minutes. When my relief arrived at 4 o'clock, a lance corporal named Breck, who had the decency to say nothing beyond the formal exchange of post, I turned, walked the length of the chapel, and stepped out through the rear door into the pre-dawn corridor. The cadet was waiting just outside. He was not supposed to leave his post until his own relief arrived, and I noted that mildly, and he colored and told me his relief was already inside, that they had passed me during the exchange, and I accepted this because it was probably true and because the boy clearly had something he needed to say. He did not say it immediately. We walked a few paces down the corridor, far enough that our voices would not carry back into the chapel, and then he stopped, and I stopped with him, and he looked at me in the way the young look at the old when they know they are about to ask something that might have no answer. He asked me what that had been. What I had done at the casket. I considered a number of things to say. The correct answer, technically, was that it was a deviation from regulation and he should not note it in any written record. The honest answer was that it was the only thing I had left to give a man I had known for 6 years, because everything else, every word, every gesture, every hour of the time we had shared before the column marched through the eastern gate, had been spent, and there was nothing remaining but that one small act of contact, that one unrepeatable acknowledgement. But I did not say either of those things, because neither of them was what the cadet was really asking. What he was really asking was what it looked like, from the outside, when a guardsman finally ran out of ways to hold everything in, and what it looked like when he chose a single, careful, authorized by nothing gesture to carry it across. I told him to find Sergeant Penrose in the morning. I told him to ask Penrose what it meant. I found out later what Penrose told him, because the cadet wrote it down in his personal log and showed me. Years after, when he was no longer a cadet and Penrose was no longer with the regiment and it was a different kind of mourning altogether. Penrose had listened to the question. He had been quiet for a long time. And then he had said 4 words. It means he was there. That is the whole of it. That is what 11 years at a post, and 6 years of a friendship, and 4 years of carrying a name in the place where you used to keep your composure, that is what all of it amounted to, in the end. Not a speech. Not a record. Not a mention in any dispatch or citation or regimental history. A hand on a box. 3 seconds. And a man who was there. I have stood a great many posts since that night. I have stood them in the rain and in the heat and on mornings when my legs ached from the stone and on evenings when the crowds were thick and loud and nothing about the work seemed meaningful. I have stood them when the world felt large and purposeful and when it felt small and grinding and indifferent. And I have stood them knowing that the post is not the point. The post is the container. What you put inside it, the discipline, the endurance, the private accounting you make with the dead and the living and the version of yourself you are still trying to become, that is the point. The post holds it. The uniform holds it. The regiment holds it. And sometimes, at 20 minutes to 4 in a candlelit chapel, when you have held it long enough, you reach out your hand and you set it down. Just for 3 seconds. And then you pick it back up, and you return to attention, and you carry on.